Yeah.
All right, we want to welcome everyone to writing conferences, inviting students into the feedback conversation. This is part of the Mosaic 2020 conversation. And this was originally presented at NCTE 2019 with myself, Adrienne Nestor, and Susan Barber. And then we reinvented this. This is the second iteration of this, looking at it specifically for Jennifer and I's state conference. And then really putting a close eye on what it looks like to do writing conferences in the current environment that we're in. So we welcome you no matter what your classroom looks like, whether it's fully virtual, whether you're in some sort of hybrid situation, or you're seeing more students face to face.
So welcome everybody. Just a little bit about how Adrienne and I met. Here's our picture. We're kind of fangirling over Clint Smith. We met initially in a Twitter chat and realized that we were both from Virginia and we live about an hour apart from each other. And so last November, actually about a year ago exactly, we were able to coordinate a field trip to have our students go and listen to Clint Smith read some of his collection of poetry, which was super awesome for us.
So we both teach in Virginia, but what we'd like to point out to you is a little bit about our schedules. I am on a 4x4 block schedule, and I was virtual until about 2 weeks ago, and now I've been in hybrid and synchronous learning, and we use Google Classroom in my county.
And I'm Jennifer Stuckey. I realized I just never introduced myself. I teach in Lynchburg, Virginia. And this year we have moved to a 4x4 block schedule. We've never done semester scheduling before. We were in a 7-period day previously. We are currently hybrid. We started the year hybrid also. So I have my students, 2 groups, 2 times a week. And we also have the added fun of switching to Canvas as our LMS this year. So thinking about what the pandemic has taught us about writing conferences, they might not be in this new normal. They might not be the traditional shoulder to shoulder, but some things that Adrienne and I have realized are that they are still important. And we're still trying to find newer and creative ways to make these happen in our classrooms. Surprisingly, Adrienne has actually found that they're easier to do virtually than in person. And I have much, much smaller numbers of students because of the current situation. So I can make more time for writing conferences also. We think that they are more important than ever because of the limited interaction that we all have with each other and students have with their teachers face to face. And they're still just a great way to build community in our classrooms and culture. And going slower this year, but more in depth with the things that we're doing in our classes.
So there are a lot of goals that you can achieve when you are conducting writing conferences. And one of the main things is just to remember is to highlight the fact that writing is a process, and we're giving the students ownership of their writing. These are their papers, they're not ours. And conferencing can really highlight that. And writing's not a one and done, get the grade, move on to the next assignment. And we feel like through these writing conferences, we are preparing them to move away from us, whatever that next step may be. There's a lot of things that we all know that we want to kind of establish here at the beginning about feedback and about writing conferences. And feedback is essential for this student learning. And feedback is different from grading. We have to have students enter the conversation and be able to talk about that. In my district, we can't go gradeless, and it's not an option for us. And so there are ways that we'll talk about later about delaying a grade and really being able to look at feedback in the writing process different from just grading. And then also, feedback is hard. It requires a lot of effort and it's ongoing. I think back when I was first teaching and I was basically a copy editor for my middle school students and then my 10th graders. You know, I marked up their papers, they took a look at the grade and then probably threw it into the trash can. And it does take time and energy and patience to go back and do this. And you have to hold yourself back from fixing student work. And it's a process that requires a lot of listening. Putting a grade on the paper is easier. And we acknowledge that it requires a lot of effort and is an ongoing process.
Absolutely. And while we are here to talk about ways to increase productivity and effectiveness, we do realize that feedback looks different for different teachers and for different classrooms and for different students and from one period to the next often. And so one size absolutely does not fit all. Feedback is definitely two-way. It's giving and receiving. I like to, in my classroom, make sure that I give a lot of opportunity for student evaluation, self-evaluation, in preparation for our conferences and self-assessment. I'm also, this year, I'm really finding that I have a totally different mindset when I'm preparing for a writing conference than I do when I'm grading a paper, because then I'm not looking for ways that I can take off points or ways that this writing fits into the rubric, but instead I'm really looking for ways that I can make suggestions for improvement. So just that shift in mindset really helps me in my classes. We should definitely not be the only ones, however, delivering feedback to our students, because first of all, we can't do it all. I think back to Kelly Gallagher's recommendation that students should be writing 4 times more than we can be reading. And so we also try to find ways for students to get feedback from their peers, from their parents, from students. And we have a blog exchange that we participate in. And so we want that feedback to be ongoing, but not only from us, because it's too much for any one person. We know that feedback can be a combination of low tech or high tech. In this virtual world, we have to use a lot more technology. And technology is a great tool, but some of the best feedback can come from those low tech options. A quick 3 to 5 minute conference virtually or face to face can clear up issues in student writing that I might never do with all the red ink in the world or comments that I can offer.
So if you're still with us, then you believe that feedback is an important part of the process. You want to add more writing conferences likely to your curriculum, but there are 4 major barriers that we've identified, and the number one is time, especially in the environment that we're currently in. Even in the before times, we had things like fire drills and field trips and picture day and early dismissals and assemblies and all kinds of things that you had to work around as a teacher. Now we have so many different barriers to our time. A lot of you have seen your time, whether it's with the computer, virtually learning, or face-to-face, really significantly reduced because of the current pandemic style teaching that we are faced with. And the other barrier that I'd like to talk about is, what are the other kids doing? I had a hard time when my students were all in person to be able to really sacrifice time where I can go and conference it with them, maybe in the hallway. And then, what are the other students doing? Is this a good use of my time?
And so another barrier in a normal year, whatever that looks like, might be number of students. Not this year for me, actually, because I have far fewer students than I've had in the past. But we all know that in a normal year, this is a huge factor. Also, this hybrid situation leaves me with only 2 days face-to-face with students. So figuring out how to manage their schedules and how to get individual time with them can still be a bit of a barrier and a little tricky. Also, failure to try new things, because this is not what feedback looked like for us when we were students. And it's not what feedback looked like when we became teachers either. So it's sometimes easier to just mark items off of a list and go through that rubric. But what we do with the reflection in the writing conferences, that provides much more opportunity for reflection and growth. So the how of writing conferences. We're just going to go through with you some ways that we have been able to make this work in our classrooms. It's definitely not perfect, and it's definitely always a work in progress. But the hybrid model this year in particular has forced me to really slow down and spend more time with individual students in front of me. Sometimes I only have, honestly, one of my classes is 3 people face-to-face in the classroom with me. But when I sit down with them individually and they talk me through their thought process in writing, they talk me through, what are they seeing in the prompt? What is defensible about their thesis? I see light bulbs go off in ways that I haven't been able to in the past. We are looking at in-process feedback, and so I'm finding it's so much more effective to give even a small piece of in-person or in-process feedback than it is to write something on the paper and return it with a grade, because like Adrienne said, they just don't necessarily look at it. I find that I have a lot of success when I don't try to control the feedback in process and I hand it over to them, and I'll just say, talk to me about this essay. What did you see? What are you seeing? What are you trying to accomplish? And so I'll often have students put questions or their own comments as comments in Google Docs. This is one way that we tackle this, and it puts me as the facilitator at the exact place that this student wants to work and focus on in their writing.
So we're going to get down to now some specific methods for doing this. This is a picture from before socially distanced and masked, obviously. And this was from a very large class that I co-taught with another teacher. And we used this red, yellow, and green cup, or you could use cards as a method. And it's a way to be able to drop in on student writing while it's in progress. And so red, of course, is I'm totally stuck, I can't move on. Yellow is I have a question, I need your attention pretty soon. And green is I'm rolling, I'm good to go. We would have students sometimes that would, when they were supposed to be writing, we would be working with different students and they would be doing nothing. I mean, they could really be sneaky about that sometimes. And so this gives them a way to do that. This could also work in a virtual setting if you have kids with some type of signal that you could come up with, where everybody could continue to work and then you could drop in on their Google Doc as they were doing it. So a no-tech approach to voice recording could be whisper reading. And so I think reading a piece out loud is so very important because it allows students to catch so many mistakes and find, especially small grammatical things. So we just would have students put their elbows on their desk, plug their ears, and then we would all do it together at one time so no one would feel silly. And they would whisper read their paper. And again, this is giving them ownership of their own paper before they move on to the full editing process. Vocaroo is a free recording site that you could use to do that. Students could use their voice memos on their phones. It's a very helpful thing to do. What you're seeing right here is the Vocaroo so the student's essay is there, and then they also attach the Vocaroo, so it proves that they've taken the step of reading their essay through at least once aloud, and then they can attach it there in Google Classroom. So quick conferences have worked so well for me. And so this picture is kind of funny. So this is a student at home. This is a student in person with her mask on. She's in the back of my room, and that's me up in that top corner. And also that's the front facing right there. So we're having a 3-person conference, and I'm able to utilize my student in person, also my student at home, and work together on one piece. And I would, have them sign up for a conference, and I would never look at this paper ahead of time. The student reads it aloud to me cold. And so that is one that's really a time saver. If you're like us, everything that you're grading in this hybrid or virtual model online takes so much longer. Everything takes so much longer. So a lot of times I would read a paper and then I would come to the conference And by then I'd read, 24 other papers all about the same topic. And I've forgotten, even with my notes, I really need to go back and read it again. So this cuts out that process, puts it more on the student. They read it aloud, and then I'm able to give immediate feedback right in a 10 or 15-minute window.
I actually was doing that in my, I had an observation. My assistant principal came into my room last week and she asked me that question. She said, "Did you read the papers before they came to you?" And I said, "No, I didn't."
Yeah, we don't
And
have
that's
time
perfect
in this
because it's a time
environment. Yeah.
saver.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we think about student preparation, this summer, when Carol Jago presented for this Mosaic conference, she uses the question with her students, what does this poem want me to know? And Adrienne and I are big fans of taking other people's ideas and tweaking them to make them our own. So a variation of her question that I like to ask of my students or have them ask of themselves is, what does this writing piece want me to know as they prepare for their conferences? Also, we're exploring a variety of ways to make these conferences happen in this virtual or hybrid world. And so Adrienne uses just a simple Google Doc with a link to a Zoom conference. Is that correct?
Actually, the link is to their paper.
Okay, to
they
their
sign
paper.
up for the conference and link to their paper. Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. And then in the spring, I actually used Sign Up Genius for the first time for some end of the year check-in conferences. But this year I have found a colleague introduced me to Calendly. And that allows students to take ownership of, they have to go in there and they have to figure out what works for their schedule instead of us having to juggle that. They set up the conference and then they actually get an email notification, and so do I. I also have a space in there for them to be able to ask questions or to focus on what it is they want this conference to be about. And then this slide shows a pre-conference form that our friend Sarah Soper from Michigan shared with us. And this is a good illustration of the kinds of things that we like to ask our students to consider before they come to conferences. So how did they feel about their essay and why did they feel that way? And what did they think they did well? And where are those places that they really feel like they can make some improvements? And that gives me as the teacher a place, or several places actually, a way in to give them some guidance and some recommendations.
So all of these previous ideas have really been about putting the ball back into the students' court and, putting the heavy lifting on them, which is especially important right now, I feel like. So now moving a little bit more to the teacher's role, a classic go-to is a glow and a grow. And so I would do that on physical papers. A lot of times I would put in yellow would be my glow and green would be my grow. And you can certainly do that online. And then behind this, if you look, you can see the feedback from essays. This is just stapled into a folder. And so students were responsible for recording their essay topic, what their glow was, what their grow was, and then what their overall score was. And then they had to go back to that folder. And of course, this can be digitized. They would go back to that folder and look at what were the things that they need to improve on from the last essay. And then they need to show that growth before the next time. Kaizena is a great tool to be able to use. I think it's one that a lot of people are familiar with, to be able to leave voice messages. And then there's a new one that we have both used. This is Moat, and I just find it a little bit more user-friendly because the Moat button is ready to go in the comment feature at all times once you've enabled the extension. It is free, and you can just enable that Chrome extension. Another great way to have a little bit of maybe more of a non-traditional writing conference is to use Screencast-O-Matic or Screencastify, which both have free versions. I know the Screencastify is only 5 minutes, but I think Screencast-O-Matic, the free version is 15. Is that right? I think yes. That's what we came up with. So if you don't have the paid version of either one of these, you could do it. So what you do is, if you could not find a synchronous time to meet with a student, you could talk through their paper and then record that. Or you could possibly record it with the student and then send your recording to the parent, especially if issues with this. My students really appreciated this when we did their college essay conferences. If we recorded some of those because it was a little bit too much for them to take in at one time. So they were able to go back, watch it again, pause it, and things like that. Again, giving them more ownership of that. So there's a couple of links here that you can look at the common example. And there's also a moving writers post from Rebecca Odell about using these in the classroom in order to connect with parents.
I also love using Flipgrid for students to be able to step back and reflect on the moves that they have made in their writing. So there's an example here. My student Molly is explaining her thinking process through, she wrote a first day's poem, first lines of emails I've received during quarantining, which is modeled after Jess Salfia's poem that went viral on Twitter. So she used that one as a mentor text, and she walks me through in her Flipgrid video what she realized she was doing as she was putting this poem together. So this benefits me because I can see her thinking. And then you can also use Flipgrid for students to interact with each other's work too, and seeing the moves that they can make in their writing. Highlighting essays is an old standby, but we like to have students do this before they come to a writing conference, or even if we don't have time to do full writing conferences, we can still see their thinking much more visibly on the page. They can highlight for whatever it is that they're supposed to be focusing on, their claims, their evidence, or commentary. Maybe we're looking at using more vivid verbs, or more precise details, rhetorical devices, whatever it is that we want to emphasize at that moment in class.
And of course, that can be in person or also in a digital format. So peer editing is something that I struggled with for many years, but the simple fact is there are more of them than there are of us. And so if we can use those numbers for us, that would be really great. This is a link to, if any of you still have to do a process research paper, which I have to do with my dual enrollment classes. This is a breakdown of, and this has been something that I've been editing for years and years and years to be able to kind of try to perfect this peer editing process. I found it impossible to read all of their rough drafts and then turn right around and read all of their final drafts and give comments and feedback. So I had to institute some peer editing in this. But what I found that students really need is a lot of structure in peer editing. And so you're welcome to click this link and look at the example of that with traditional research papers.
And so again, we're just kind of constantly reevaluating our role as the teacher, because we want to make sure that we are not functioning as just copy editors. Instead, we're showing them writing moves, or writing alongside them when we can. We're making this a conversation, but letting them explore what works for them and be more in control of their writing process. And like Adrienne always says, less of us and more of them. And this practice of conferencing also really establishes a tone that we feel is important in our classroom. Talk to me about your writing, and I then become the listener in the process. And this builds community too, and builds those relationships that are so valuable for us in our classrooms. We also can delay the grades this way, because we know that once we put that grade on the paper, then that ends the conversation, and we don't want the conversation to end, because writing is a process that's ongoing.
And I'd like to talk about this grouping activity. So this was originally on Ditch That Textbook's website, with Esther Park originated this. I adapted it slightly for my classroom to be able to use with Google Meet. Now that Google Meet has breakout rooms, you can also use this with the Zoom breakout rooms, but I use this for students to be able to work on their writing. And so I have a spot where they can go to meet with me, the teacher help room. They can also be in an open group room where they just want their mic on, their camera on, and be able to talk through. When we did this, I'm not sure that the kids that went in room 2 accomplished that much that day, but they had a really good time, and I'll kind of take that as a win during this time. They would pretend like they were working on stuff when I popped in. There was also the quiet group room. So they wanted to be there and they wanted to maybe just use the chat feature and just have some support of classmates. But overwhelmingly, my students chose the quiet room. So I made a bunch, not just one, but I made a bunch of individual breakout rooms. And it just took a few minutes to be able to get that going as we started class. So this can be a way to approach writing conferences, because this could be where they're working on other things where we talked about as we move into this. So, you know, what are the other students supposed to be doing during writing conferences? One of the things I've really liked is that virtually I've been able to have students sign up for these quick conferences, and then they have totally separate asynchronous work to do. So then you don't have to really deal with this. But if not, there are some great things, and we could spend 45 minutes or do a whole session just on these things. Shout out to AP Lit Chat, AP Lit Chat Boxer Group for all of these different ideas. But of course, we always want students reading, and so independent reading is a great thing to be doing during this time. This link for HyperDocs links you out to, I can't remember, is it to the AP Lit site? Yes, so this is the AP Lit help site. They're also on the Teach Living Poet site for the poetry ones, but so many HyperDocs that are just ready to go for classes to be able to work asynchronously on some really good stuff. Please check that out. I like listicles. They're always some of my favorite writing that students do. It's really low stakes. They can do, you know, the top 6 fishing lures to use for bass fishing or something else I know nothing about. Or they can, you know, write about video games. They can write about anything that they're passionate about, and they just kind of do a ranking and write. And I can hear a lot of student voice when they do listicles.
So a few other things the students can be doing in the meantime while we're conferencing. Adrian and I both participate in blog share. So students are writing monthly poetry blogs, and then they are getting feedback from peers in classrooms across the country. But this link will actually take you to the Teach Living Poets website because Melissa Smith kind of organizes our poetry blog share, and she has tons of great information and links to poems and poets and activities on Teach Living Poets. And mentor text writing is always a great thing. I had a student ask me the other day, are we ever going to have to write a poem without using a mentor? And I said, no, we can always use mentors. And then book snaps. This link takes you to Tara Martin's website, where she explains the process of students creating book snaps based on what they're seeing in their independent reading. And there's a whole project that you can do. And always their own writing. They can be working through their writing process.
We would love for you to enter the conversation. We'd love to learn from you and hear what you have to say about writing conferences. What has worked for you, particularly in whatever situation that you are currently in. If you want to continue this conversation on the AP Lit Facebook page or on Twitter with the hashtag Mosaic2020. This is our contact information. If you'd like to get in touch with us for any reason, and I'll actually bring the bit.ly back up at this point so that you can see that. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.